And it seems that we have to continue our inquiries. So there's a story. In a time long ago, on an island in what we now know as the Mediterranean Ocean, there lived a very, very poor man by the name of Hassan. Now Hassan would make a subsistence living by taking the ocean water and boiling it in a pan so that the residual salt he could take to the market and sell. Now one day when the sun was beating down on his head and the sand was burning his feet, he noticed in the bottom of his pan a metal object, a square on which was etched some ancient hieroglyphics. So taking this object into his hand and straining to see what it was that was etched on it, suddenly he looked up, and coming towards the island was a galleon being rowed towards the shore. Now as Hassan watched, the galley landed just nearby, and out of it jumped a number of galley slaves with silver rings and chains around their neck to moor and secure the vessel to the beach. And then followed was a retinue of servants to lay down carpets. And then came out of the vessel 2 slaves leading 2 cheetahs on golden chains, followed by 4 burly men carrying a big chest. And then came following was a resplendent figure, dressed in satin embroidered finery. It was none other than the viceroy of the caliph, who had come to the island to gather the taxes from the people who inhabited that place. Now, as Hassan held in his hand the metal object he had found in the bottom of his pan, he thought to himself, "Oh, look at that! Why is it that this, a man such as myself, can become a viceroy and have such splendor when I am so poor? If only I could be a viceroy, maybe I can live in comfort and ease for the rest of my days." And just then the sky went dark, and there was thunder, and a voice emanated from this darkness and said to Hassan, "You have in your hands an object of magic which will fulfill any wish you utter. Now become the viceroy." And with that another roll of thunder and a swishing sound, and Hassan felt himself flying through the air. And suddenly, when he dared to open his eyes, He was sitting in a sumptuous room, on a chaise lounge, being served sherbet by a retinue of servants. And as he sat there, the door opened, and in came a group carrying a great chest. And those who carried it bowed in front of him and said, "Our honorable viceroy, it is now time to disperse the money we have gathered. That for the caliph, that to keep our coffers full of grain." Oh, Hassan, the weight! He had never seen so much coinage in all his life, but the decision how to separate it brought him great concern. After that was done, it was time to bring in all of those people who had concerns that he had to solve, and again there was great amount of perplexity. And after a while, Hassan was feeling so very weighed down by the duties and concerns. He said, "Well, perhaps being a viceroy is not so good after all." And he was still holding the object in his hand. And he said, well, maybe if I became the caliph, I wouldn't have such duties, and I would be able to live in comfort. And again the world went dark and thunder, and suddenly again the swishing sound and the feeling of him being lifted up and carried aloft. And then there he was, sitting on a splendid throne, garbed in raiments such as he had never felt or seen before. But just as he was realizing where he was and who he was, because servants came in and greeted him with all those honorifics that were due to a caliph, a messenger came in and said, "Oh, great honorable one, we have been invaded by the Genghis Khan. He and his army are at our gates. Come, you must save us." And they put a sword in Hassan's hand and dressed him in heavy armor. Inside, he was terribly afraid, realizing the responsibilities, the weight not only of his armor and the heavy sword which had been placed in his hand, but that of saving others and maybe dying himself. Again, holding the object in his hand, he felt that this weighed too heavily on him, and he thought, I wish I were back to being a simple man, boiling my ocean water in my pan. Again the world went dark. Thunder and the swishing sound, and Hassan felt himself back on the beach with his pan in his hand. somehow the object that he had held was gone, lost, as the wind had lifted him and carried him so rapidly from where he had been. But for the rest of his days, Hassan was happy with his lot. So, no doubt you can guess the question that arises from this story. Was this object a charm, an amulet, a talisman? There are many, many stories of this kind containing an object such as this, having the same ending, coming back to what we started out as. Is this a charm? Is it an amulet? Is it a talisman? Or perhaps something else? What is your thought? Many, many years ago, when I was just coming into my teens, I think I was only about 11 or 12. My father dug up in the garden a gold band, a bangle, but the gold had mostly been worn off it, and he gave it to me, but it was too big to wear on my wrist, so I wore it up above my elbow. I wore that gold bracelet for many years. I believe it was up until the time that I was hospitalized and came out to have the experience that has been described previously of oneness, or whatever other name we can now call it, awakening or so forth. But somehow at that time the bracelet disappeared, and I was never able to find it again, even though I searched and searched and searched. Until now, I don't know what that object did. All I know was that I clung to it. First thing in the morning, I would put it on my arm above the elbow and wear it constantly. It came and it went. Was it a charm? Was it an amulet? Was it a talisman? What do you think? Have you had an experience like this? If so, what would you call it?
I think it was like a charm that you hung on to and then you didn't need it anymore.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Some experience changed. You realised, though you still looked for it though.
Yes, I looked and looked for it, but it had gone.
My feeling is that first story is this man on the beach. I think that object is a charm because it charmed him and then changed him, and then eventually he came back to his own being. And then I think he got into his talisman.
Yes.
And then your story is, I think that's amulet
Yes.
to protect you until you don't need it
Anymore.
And then you found your talisman.
Yes. Would you agree with this? Bringing us closer to understanding what a talisman is, or what a talisman represents for us.
We feel that with our own body, there's somehow charm is like really like a head,
Yes.
like a thinking brain, or ideas or wanting desire. And amulet is really our heart, like what we seek for or search for, whatever the truth. And then talisman is, to me, it's really like a being.
Okay.
Which relate to this area.
Okay. Yes.
I once had a little gold symbol that was from Anandamaga, and it had the main symbol, which was a six-pointed star, and then had a swastika in the middle and a rising sun. And I remember being out with my son was, he must have been about 3 or 4, and we were out on the reef at Michaelmas Cay, and I never took this necklace off. And so I was out swimming and he wanted to come out with me. I was snorkeling and he wanted to come out with me. And so, we were playing in that, and I took him out into water that was about up to here. And, we're looking at the fish and all this sort of thing. And then the chain broke. And and the medallion fell into the sand, and I could see it, but because I had my son, I couldn't reach down to pick it up. And then someone saw that I was in a dilemma and trying to get something, and he came over and he had flippers on.
Oh.
So I saw it disappear into the sand.
Yes.
And then it wasn't so long after that yes, we ended up leaving the mark. So.
Yes.